God is dead, his corpse hidden in the catacombs beneath Mordu. In the slums of the sea-battered city, a young boy called Nathan Treves lives with his parents, eking out a meager existence by picking treasures from the living mud and the half-formed, short-lived creatures it spawns, until one day his desperate mother sells him to the mysterious Master of Mordu. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Mordu by Pheby, which was a book that I was pretty interested to try. I'd heard about this one and then ended up getting a copy. And as I read in the description, it sounds pretty interesting. A city on the corpse of a dead god. The master of the city, feeds off of the corpse basically for energy for his magic. And the first chapter of this, I included this in the video where I read first chapters of books, was just crazy. The imagery, just him going out into the living mud and creating a fluke, which is piece of life, that's a bundle of infant arms and legs. And it was so strange, and the visuals were so crazy, and I was very, very interested. Unfortunately, I found this book to be pretty disappointing. So I'm going to talk about the things I liked and the things I didn't like. And I will say this was a well-written book. Pheby does seem like he definitely knows how to write a book. But this just really didn't land with me for kind of a number of reasons. So the first thing I want to mention is, and I don't know if this has to do with the fact that this author apparently normally before this wrote more literary fiction, and apparently is pretty popular in that space but was trying fantasy. So you do get some parts that read slightly more like literary fiction than fantasy, but more so where I want to bring up the author is it does seem like he just kind of has this way of coming off like he seems to think he's a lot better than he is. And I was trying to say that in the nicest possible way. There are several times where things don't make a lot of sense, or he phrases things like he needed to tell you or you wouldn't get it, and it just kind of came off odd. So I mentioned in the first chapter challenge as well, this starts with it mentions, if you find yourself confused, there's a glossary, and then it has this line about the glossary containing some information the main character doesn't know. So I thought that was kind of weird. And then he postulizes on whether or not an author should tell the reader information. And then there's a dramatis personae, which I don't have a problem with. A character list can be helpful if there's a lot of characters. The thing is, there really aren't that many characters. And even right here, the way that many characters are described, it kind of tells you more than you need to know. In the dramatis personae, for example, it unequivocally tells you that the master is very evil. Among other things, it specifically talks about these different types of things, and it's just kind of at first I was thinking oh, this is just kind of trying to give you weird tidbits. And speaking of weird tidbits, there's these several pages I mentioned where it just says, additionally in the pages of this book you will find many unusual things, including but not limited to, and it just lists a bunch of random strange things. I'm pretty sure all of which were actually in the book, but it was a really weird way to start a book. Once I was getting closer, I felt like the book was nearing the end, but I still had quite a lot of bit left, and that's when I realized this book has a over 100-page glossary. I'm trying to flip through to the beginning of it to show you how much. So, this is the book. This chunk I'm holding in my hand here, that is the glossary for this book. This is not a simple glossary. This is more encyclopedic entries, explaining all kinds of stuff. Much of it, which I absolutely did not, and I'm not going to read the whole glossary, but much of it either things that don't seem relevant, and it makes kind of no sense for them to be here, or just explaining all kinds of things that were not explained in the story. If you need a 100-page glossary to fill in all of the gaps and explain all of the things that you couldn't do in the story, it doesn't really bode well. But literally, it mentions, like, there are, and granted, it's not just like a straight up normal definition, but it literally has entries for like antechamber, pharmacist, bacon. I mean, these are all real things that are in here that the author felt needed a glossary entry. I really don't get that, so that was just kind of weird. But I do want to get into the story. So those are things that weren't particularly about the story, but just kind of the style and kind of things that made me start to have issues. Because there are things, like I said, I didn't read the glossary at all while reading. I never actually do. I rarely flip through it at all, even after finishing a book. But even like I said, the dramatis personae, the character list at the beginning, even that kind of just gives away some things in a way. I feel like if the story is approached a little bit differently, it could have gone very differently. So the strong suit here was the world. The world was very interesting. The world was very unique. I heard somebody compare it to like a Tim Burton movie, 100%. The way this started out and some other things in it, I could absolutely see this being one of those kind of weird, creepy, animated Tim Burton movies with the claymation and everything. Like, I feel like that could have worked, but it starts out very, very interesting, and then it kind of just switches a couple times with what we're doing. We start off with the story of this boy. We learn his father is very sick. His mother has had to become a prostitute in order to feed him and his father, basically, because his father's extremely ill and like can't move or do anything. And so he's desperately trying to find ways to make money. But his father has told him basically never ever to use his magic. And so that's kind of the dilemma that's set up. So I'm thinking like we're going to look at that. We're going to get the master involved, that sort of thing. But we start there and then we turn basically the whole first chunk and a lot of the book actually. The whole first part specifically turns into more of like your typical like thief guild gang type thing. Read strongly of like what you'd find in the Lies of Locke Lamora. Younger people planning these heists, and it was fine. But it wasn't really what I signed up for. And so I'm like, okay, we're gonna probably get back to more. And there were some like different pieces and secrets there, and there was some stuff that was clearly set up for the future books because it wasn't at all relevant. Which I'm fine with foreshadowing, but when you just kind of clumsily show me things and be like, I'm not ever going to address that again, but later I will. Once again, there are better ways of going about that. But so we get that, and then the second part of the book, which is quite long, goes into basically just the tedium of everyday life and learning and kind of going from there. And it's at this part too, because, and I'm not going to get into spoilers, but it's already kind of mentioned, like I said, in the synopsis what happens, but we have our character who's learning basically like a new life and hearing all of these people talk about the master. And the master is always presented as being basically a god and infallible and just to be worshipped. And all of these things are explained about him. And it's like, it kind of almost, like sometimes the way things are described, and I know it's characters explaining it to a child, but the way it just comes off very, like, sanctimonious. And I don't mean the characters saying it, I just mean the writing style in general. So that kind of annoyed me, but more so, nothing was really happening. I lost all of this stuff I was really interested in and had it replaced with much more mundane elements, some of which still were fantasy elements, but we kind of just stopped focusing on the interesting world for a large part of the book. And then there's just some other parts that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. There was some explanation for why some things happened, what was really going on, but there were other things where it just really seemed like it happened because the story needed it to. And that, once again, is just something I really don't care for as much. The ending did pick up the pace a lot, and it the way it ends, I know it's supposed to make you want to continue. I just kind of didn't really care by the end. I ended up finishing it because by the time I was really hard considering DNFing the book, I was nearly done anyway, so I just kept going. But there were just all of the premise, the base promise of what the book was about didn't really hold to be true. The things became relevant again, but everything that started to pull me in and to pique my interest just kind of wasn't after a little bit. And it just seemed like this was almost a couple of different types of books. I am usually the first person who will say, like, oh, I wish this book was longer with a lot of books, because I'm fine with long books. I know a lot of people aren't. This, though, and granted, over 100 pages of it is glossary, but this is a 600-page book. There is not enough content in here for 600 pages. There just simply isn't. And I think even the author knew it, which is once again why 100 pages were done, just trying to explain things more, because there's a lot of filler, but you don't really get a lot of explanations. This, I think, could have been told much better in a more condensed story format, where A, that means the ratio of time we're spending with the cool, interesting aspects is a lot larger, and B, the stuff that just kind of got boring and slow is less. But also, it just, once again, this book didn't seem like it really knew what it wanted to be. It started and it was marketed as one thing, and then it just kind of was a vastly different story for me. The writing is good. There were some good moments in here. A lot of it was extremely predictable, though. And part of it, I think, was supposed to be, but once again, it's kind of hard to tell, because there are certain things and reveals that are done where you've been basically explicitly shown it was going to happen, but the author writes it like you're supposed to be surprised. Like I said, some things were revealed straight out so early on, or even in the character list, that by the time you get to the reveal, you're like, well, obviously. And then when you're trying to, like, determine, like, who are these people? Well, you already know, because you were told. Like, a character list should be brief, should mention things that have either already happened, if it's a later book, or just tell who the person is, you know, where they're from, that basic sort of thing. You know, other books use character lists. Malazan's down here now. It's moved. Malazan, Faithful and the Fallen. It works. It's telling you who the people are, so that you know, because there are a lot of characters in those books. And this just really didn't do that. There aren't that many characters that are listed, aren't named, and the idea that this is going to be such a complex story that you're just going to get lost and they need a glossary, to me, really didn't happen. It was not a very complex narrative. It was pretty simple. And then there were, like I said, some kind of twists and turns along the way. But once again, it just seemed like the author seemed to think he was putting out this just unbelievably complex, amazing piece of work. And to me, it really didn't come off that way. And so, like, I have not read anything else from this author. I really don't know anything about them besides this book. Like I said, that's just kind of how it came off to me. And so that's why I was so disappointed. I had really high hopes for this. It seemed like it was going to be very interesting. Everything, like the cover art, is really interesting. The first chapter and the blurb about it, basically, I found to be really interesting as well. And I just feel like I was given a much more mundane story. And it just did not come together at all for me. So I know I've spent basically this entire time complaining about the book and talking mostly negatives. Like I said, it is written well. Like, the prose is solid. I didn't really like the writing style very much, but the prose is solid. It is generally written well, and Alex Pheby, the author, obviously is a good vocabulary and is good at actually writing. But, you know, like I said, everything else I've said kind of outweighed that for me. There were a couple of times that were, you know, genuinely funny. For example, and once again, I'm not considering this a spoiler because it's literally mentioned in the character list before you start. There's a talking dog. There's a dog that can talk but not send psychic messages, and then a dog that can send psychic messages but not talk. That was a fun interaction. It definitely felt like it was coming more so out of a children's story, but it was still a fun interaction. And there were some other times like that where things did work well or were interesting, but so much of this just seemed like I'm going to give you as little detail as possible so you won't think about the plot holes, and then give you a gigantic info dump in the glossary because I know I haven't adequately explained anything. So I definitely will not be continuing this series. This book came out to about a 2.5 stars for me. I didn't really like it that much. And it was, you know, I'd round down to a 2 if I'm rounding. But like I said, it was well written. It wasn't just bad. It just was pretty meh. It was not very exciting. didn't really live up to the potential. It was just kind of a really mundane book, is where I came from. So 2.5 I thought was there. It wasn't like a strong dislike for it. It just was also not, didn't really make me feel anything too much or really enjoy it. So this one's hard to recommend because I had a lot of problems with it. I think if you like the just kind of strange Tim Burton-esque, odd setup, the kind of vague story, if you like that sort of thing, you may still really enjoy this book. I know some people, I'm sure, have enjoyed this. The reviews seem to be either people really liked it or people really didn't. So maybe it's just a divisive book. But this is definitely one where it's just like, it's not bad. Like I said, if you were interested in this and want to try it, I'm not trying to scare you off or tell you not to. This is really just my experience and the reasons that I had a lot of problems with the book. But that is all I have to say on Mordu by Alex Pheby. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to join and chat books or chat anything else. Always a ton of fun there. Conversations, book guessing games, reading sprints, buddy reads, a little bit of everything. So check it out. We'd love to have you. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.